The empty seat. A story of betrayal, silence, and the dinner that changed everything. The fork was already halfway to his mouth when he saw me standing in the doorway. My son, Daniel, 34 years old, a man I had rocked to sleep through 3 ear infections and 1 broken collarbone, a man whose college tuition I had paid by working double shifts at the plant for 6 consecutive years. That man froze with a forkful of roasted chicken, suspended in midair, and stared at me like I was a ghost he hadn't expected to survive the haunting. The table was set for 7. There were 7 plates, 7 glasses, 7 folded napkins arranged with the kind of careful precision that takes time and intention. Steam rose from a ceramic dish of scalloped potatoes in the center. A roast sat carved and gleaming under the warm light of the chandelier I had helped Daniel install 2 Christmases ago. There were candles, actual candles, the tall ivory kind in silver holders, and a bottle of red wine already breathing on the sideboard. 7 people sat around that table. I was not one of them. I stood in the doorway of my son's dining room in my good wool coat, the charcoal gray one I only wore to occasions I considered worth dressing for, holding a bottle of Merlot I had picked out at the shop on Carver Street, and I counted the faces turning toward me one by one like a slow, terrible clock. Daniel, his wife Priya, their 2 children Mia and Owen, Priya's parents Raj and Sunita, and at the far end of the table in the seat that I would have occupied sat a man I had never seen before in my life. Silver-haired, broad-shouldered, wearing a pressed blue shirt and the relaxed expression of someone who had been expected. No one spoke. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. I counted those 2. My name is Margaret Holloway. I am 61 years old. I am not a dramatic woman. I have never considered myself one. I raised Daniel alone after his father left when the boy was 9, and I did it without performance or self-pity because that was simply the work that needed doing. I am a retired school librarian. I grow tomatoes in the summer. I walk 3 miles every morning along the creek path near my apartment. I do not make scenes. I do not manufacture crises for attention. But I will tell you plainly, standing in that doorway, I felt the floor shift beneath my feet in a way I had not felt since the night a police officer appeared at my door to tell me Daniel had been in a car accident at 17. That same drop, that same sudden hollowness behind the sternum, like someone had reached in and quietly removed something essential. Daniel had called me 4 days ago. I remembered every word of it because I had been happy when I saw his name on my phone, the way I was always a little happy when he called, even now that the calls had grown shorter and less frequent with each passing year. Mom, about Sunday dinner something came up. We're going to have to reschedule. Priya's got a thing and the kids have activities. I'm sorry. I'll call you next week and we'll figure out a new date. That was it. Clean. Simple. I had said, of course, no problem, these things happen. I had put the Merlot back in the wine rack and made myself a quiet dinner at home and watched a documentary about migratory birds and gone to bed thinking nothing of it. But then my neighbor Ruth had called Saturday morning to say her son was taking her to the botanical gardens. Did I want to come? And I had mentioned that I'd had a dinner canceled and found myself with a free Sunday, and Ruth had said something that lodged in my mind like a splinter. Funny. I drove past Daniel's house yesterday and there were cars in the driveway. Looked like they were setting up for something big. I had not acted on it immediately. I had argued with myself for most of Saturday and all of Sunday morning. I was not the kind of mother who checked up on her son. I was not suspicious by nature. There was surely an explanation, a different gathering, a last-minute thing, something that had nothing to do with me. But then I had thought about that wine rack, about the bottle I had already bought for Sunday dinner, already excited to bring, and something quiet and stubborn in me had said, go. So I went. I did not call ahead, that part matters. Mom, Daniel set down his fork. His voice had the careful flatness of a man buying time. What are you doing here? Raj and Sunita were looking at their plates. Priya was looking at Daniel. The children, Mia was 11, Owen was 8, were looking at me with the wide open curiosity of children who do not yet know how to pretend something isn't happening. Owen lifted his hand in a small wave. Despite everything, it almost broke me open right there. "I was invited," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "4 days ago you told me it was canceled, but it appears it wasn't." "It's not, this isn't what you think." "Daniel," that was Priya. She said his name the way a woman says her husband's name when she has told him to do something and he has failed to do it. There was exhaustion in it and something else, something that sounded almost like relief. The man at the far end of the table stood up. He was perhaps 65, with a kind face and the posture of someone who was accustomed to managing uncomfortable situations with grace. He extended his hand across the considerable length of the dining room as if the gesture could somehow bridge it. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, "I'm Gerald Ashworth. I've heard a great deal about you." I had not heard a single syllable about him. I shook his hand anyway, because 61 years of life teaches you that basic courtesy costs nothing, even when everything else is costing you enormously. What followed was the most excruciating 40 minutes of my recent memory. Daniel brought a chair from the hallway. Priya set another place at the table. The gestures of hospitality performed under duress have a particular mechanical quality to them that is almost worse than no hospitality at all. Someone poured me a glass of wine. I sat between Owen, who immediately began telling me about a video game, and Gerald Ashworth, who had the decency to seem uncomfortable. The conversation moved in careful arcs around the obvious, the way water moves around a stone. Raj asked about the weather. Sunita complimented the potatoes. Daniel cut his food into pieces he did not eat. Mia, who had always been an old soul, watched me across the table with her mother's dark eyes and her grandmother's careful attention. I ate because it would have been worse not to. I asked Owen about school. I complimented the roast. I performed the choreography of a normal family dinner with the concentration of someone diffusing something. But my mind was doing other work entirely. Gerald Ashworth, I gathered from the fragments of conversation I was able to collect and assemble, was a retired architect. He lived 20 minutes away in Linden Hills. He had been widowed 3 years ago. He and Priya's father had met through a neighborhood association and had been friends for over a year. He had been to this house before. I could tell by the way he navigated the kitchen doorway to help carry out the dessert, by the way he knew where Daniel kept the serving spoons. He had been here before, multiple times, and I had never been told. After dinner, Daniel asked if I would stay for a moment while Priya took her parents and Gerald to the living room. The children disappeared upstairs with the reliability of children who understand that something adult and serious is about to occur. We stood in the kitchen. The remains of the meal were spread across the counter. Daniel leaned against the sink with his arms crossed, and I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a man who was guilty and tired, and beneath both of those things, frightened. That frightened me too. Daniel was not easily rattled. "How long?" I asked. He knew what I was asking. "About 8 months. 8 months, I let that settle. Gerald and Priya's father became friends first," he said. "And then Priya and I started having him over occasionally. He's a good man, Mom. He really is." "I believe you," I said. "That's not what I'm asking about." Daniel looked at the floor. "I know. Why didn't you tell me?" The silence stretched. In it, I heard 8 months of Sunday dinners I had not attended. 8 months of a life my son had been living in a room I hadn't been shown. "Priya thought," he stopped, tried again. "We thought you might make it into something it wasn't. Gerald's just a family friend." "Daniel. Mom. Look at me." He looked up. His eyes, when he finally met mine, were complicated. There was guilt in them, yes. But there was also something else, something I recognized because I had seen it before once when he was 16 and I had found a failing grade he'd been hiding for a semester. Not just guilt, grief. The specific grief of someone who has been keeping a secret so long that the secret has grown larger than they intended. "Tell me the real reason," I said quietly. He pressed his lips together. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, I could hear the low murmur of conversation from the living room, Raj's baritone, Sunita's gentle laugh. "You make things hard sometimes, Mom," he finally said. "Not on purpose, I know that, but you have opinions about everything, and when you have an opinion you're not always easy to be around. Gerald is easy. Dinner with him is easy, and I didn't want to ruin that by introducing a complication." He paused. "I didn't want to introduce you as a complication." I had asked for the truth and he had given it to me. That was the thing about Daniel. Despite everything, despite the deception of the past 4 days and the 8 months of careful omission before it, my son had never been able to lie to my face when I looked him directly in the eye and asked. I had taught him that. Or perhaps I had simply raised a boy who was, at his core, honest even when honesty was hard. I stood with his words for a long moment. "I am not going to tell you they didn't hurt. They hurt the way only true things can hurt, cleanly, precisely, without the soft edges that softened untrue things. But I am also not going to tell you that I was entirely surprised. I am a woman who loves fiercely, and I know that fierce love is not always comfortable to receive. I knew Daniel found me opinionated. I had known it for years, had told myself it was simply a difference in temperament, had sometimes wondered privately if I had leaned too hard into certain opinions in the absence of a partner to balance me. But knowing something abstractly and having your son say it quietly in a kitchen on a Sunday evening, while the sound of a life you hadn't been included in drifts in from the next room, those are two very different knowings. "I'm not going to fall apart," I told him. "I want you to know that." "Mom." "Let me finish." I smoothed the front of my wool coat. "What you did was wrong. Canceling dinner with a lie and gathering the family without me was unkind, and you know that. Whatever your reasons, that specific act was unkind, and I need you to say so." He said it without qualification, without deflection. "It was unkind, I'm sorry." "Good." I picked up my purse from the counter where I had set it. "Now, the other thing, what you said about me being difficult. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm going to think about it. Honestly. Because you have always been honest with me, even when it cost you, and I owe you the same." He looked at me with an expression I couldn't immediately name. Then I could. It was the look of someone who had been braced for an impact that didn't come. The look of someone recalibrating. "I'd like to meet Gerald properly," I said. "Not like tonight, properly. A dinner where I'm actually invited." Daniel nodded slowly. "Okay. And I'd like it if you called me more often. Not because I'll fall apart if you don't, but because I'm your mother and I like talking to you, and I think sometimes you forget that I like you, not just love you. There's a difference." His expression shifted again. Something in his eyes went soft and complicated, the way it had when he was small and I had said something that surprised him. "I know there's a difference," he said quietly. "Good," I said again. I left before dessert was finished. I said a brief and genuine goodbye to Raj and Sunita, who were warm and a little over-apologetic in the way of people who had known something was wrong and hadn't intervened. I shook Gerald's hand again and told him I hoped we'd have a chance to speak properly sometime. He said he would like that very much, and he said it in a way that made me believe him. Mia followed me to the door. She slipped her hand into mine in the entryway and looked up at me with those serious dark eyes and said, "Grandma, Dad felt really bad about it. He kept messing up when he was setting the table." "Did he?" I said. "He put the salad fork on the wrong side and had to redo it twice. Mom said he was distracted." I squeezed her hand. "Thank you for telling me that. Are you okay?" I looked at this 11-year-old girl who had inherited her mother's directness and her father's stubbornness, and some quality entirely her own that I could not yet name but recognized as rare and valuable. "I'm going to be fine," I told her, and for the first time all evening I said something in that house that contained no performance, no management, no careful calibration. I meant it simply and entirely. I drove home along the creek road, the long way. The night was clear and the moon was high and full over the water, and I drove slowly with the radio off and my thoughts doing the slow, deliberate work of sorting. I had been excluded. That was true, and it was painful, and it was not nothing. But I had also been told the truth, eventually, by my son in a kitchen on a Sunday night, and the truth, painful as it was something to work with. You cannot build anything from a comfortable lie. You can only build from what is real. I thought about what it might mean to be easier. Not quieter, I had no interest in disappearing, but perhaps more curious and less certain. Perhaps more willing to let a dinner be just a dinner, a friend just a friend, a moment just a moment, without reaching immediately for my opinion of it. Perhaps that was worth trying. I pulled into my apartment parking lot and sat for a moment with the engine running. I thought about Ruth's call earlier that morning. I thought about the bottle of Merlot I had brought to Daniel's house and left unopened on the sideboard. Then I thought about Mia's hand in mine in the doorway. About Owen's small, unrehearsed wave across the dinner table. About Daniel's eyes when I told him I liked him, not just loved him. I turned off the engine and went inside. I put the kettle on. I sat down at my kitchen table and I got out the notepad I kept by the phone, and I wrote Daniel's name at the top of the page, and I began, quietly and without drama, to think about how to do this better. Not for him, not entirely. For myself too. Because here is the thing about standing in a doorway where you were not expected. You can turn around and drive home and nurse the wound in private, which is clean and safe and changes nothing. Or you can walk in, sit down, eat the meal, hear the truth, and let the discomfort of it teach you something you needed to know. I had always believed that love was something you gave. I was only now beginning to understand, at 61 years old, on an ordinary Sunday night, with a cup of tea cooling beside me and the moon throwing silver light through my kitchen window, that love was also something you learned. Over and over again. For as long as you were lucky enough to be given the people who required it of you. 3 weeks later, Daniel called on a Tuesday for no reason in particular. We talked for 47 minutes. I counted,